Something wasn't right in the pediatric ICU. Babies, seemingly healthy one moment, were inexplicably dying the next. They say a nurse is like an angel of mercy, a comforting presence at a vulnerable time. But what happens when the angel becomes the monster? Genene Jones, a nurse suspected in up to 60 infant deaths entrusted to her care. What drove her to commit such unthinkable acts? This is a story that will leave you chilled to the bone.
We trust our nurses. Our nurses are specifically trained to provide comfort and medical care for their patients. And these patients were not only children, but they were often critically ill children. And for her to decide on her watch who lived and who died is nothing short of evil.
Little Jose Antonio Flores fought for his life. Doctors scrambled for nearly an hour, worried because his blood wouldn't clot. When they finally stopped the bleeding, they got at least a little joy. But the victory was short-lived because Jose started having seizures and bleeding again the next morning. What was the cause and why? No one knew. Sadly, little Jose's tiny heart gave out, and the cause of death was a mystery. Then, one nurse did something strange. While others rushed to help Mr. Flores, Jose's father, after he had a heart attack because of the news, the nurse grabbed the little boy's body from his brother and ran down the hospital hallway. Confused family members chased after her, but she disappeared into the morgue, the cold room for the deceased. Why did she take little Jose? No one knew. But when doctors later conducted blood tests, they found something shocking. An overdose of a blood-thinning drug, heparin. No doctor had ordered it. This strange twist of events made Jose's case even more puzzling, and hospital officials were suspicious. Then, 3-month-old Albert Garza arrived at the same ICU with diarrhea and dehydration. Doctors were already on edge after Jose's case, so when Albert started bleeding unexpectedly, alarm bells went off. This wasn't normal for a baby his age. Tests were done, and they revealed the same culprit, a dangerous overdose of heparin, a blood thinner. At first, doctors suspected a mistake, maybe faulty medicine or contaminated equipment. But after another close call, where Albert started bleeding again the moment they were called away, suspicion turned to something more sinister. They started keeping a closer eye on Albert, making sure no one was ever alone with him. Little did they know, a monster already walked the halls of the pediatric ICU. They called her the Angel of Death, and her name was Genene Jones. Dubbed the Angel of Death, her story is quite chilling. Facing charges since 1985, she is suspected in the deaths of dozens of young patients entrusted to her care.
In my opinion, I believe Genene Jones is an evil woman. I think her conscience is seared. I don't think she looks at the world the way we do.
Some say she killed about 47 babies. Others say the numbers reach over 60. Her first conviction landed her a 99-year sentence for killing 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan with a muscle relaxant, and she's linked to the deaths of several other children. Jones's twisted path began in 1950 when she was born in San Antonio, Texas, and immediately put up for adoption. Though raised in a seemingly privileged home with a pool, tennis court, and even stables, a darkness festered within. Her life was marked by a series of turbulent events and personal challenges. After the decline of her family's Kit Kat Club in the late 1950s, her father Dick tried various business ventures without much success. Genene, growing up with adopted siblings, Lisa, Wiley, and Travis, was closest to Travis, who unfortunately died in November 1966 while making a pipe bomb. His death deeply affected Genene, though her reaction at his funeral raised eyebrows among some who perceived her grief as seeking sympathy. Following her brother's death, Genene leaned heavily on her father, Dick, who was later diagnosed with terminal cancer in October 1967. Despite surviving past violent incidents, he chose not to undergo treatment and passed away in January 1968. This loss left Genene feeling even more isolated within her family, perceiving herself as the black sheep. To escape familial tensions and perhaps seeking a fresh start, Genene married her boyfriend, James Delaney Jr., in June 1968, shortly after graduating from high school. Their marriage, however, quickly deteriorated due to Genene's extramarital affairs and their constant conflicts over money and Genene's penchant for drag racing. James's stint in the Navy didn't improve matters, and upon his return from service, he found Genene had already filed for divorce, accusing him of abuse. Their relationship ended amidst turmoil and legal restrictions, leaving Genene to navigate single motherhood and her own aspirations. Genene's life continued to be a whirlwind of personal turmoil. However, a turning point arrived when a medical issue forced her to change careers. Doctors diagnosed her with an allergy to chemicals in beauty supplies, making it impossible for her to continue as a beautician. Faced with a new path, Genene enrolled in vocational nursing school. Little did anyone know, this decision would set in motion a horrifying chain of events. In June 1976, she began attending the San Antonio Independent School District's School of Vocational Nursing. She did well, graduating on May 20th, 1977, as a licensed vocational nurse. By graduation, Genene was 7 months pregnant and gave birth to her daughter, Crystal, on July 17th, 1977. She moved in with her mother, who took care of the children, while Genene worked as a nurse. She got a job at Methodist Hospital, where she had previously worked as a beautician. Genene's nursing career started with promise, but troubling signs emerged quickly. Initial positive reviews gave way to concerns within just 5 months. Her performance evaluations noted her making decisions beyond her experience and exceeding her authority. 3 months later, a patient complaint forced her resignation. Details were disturbing. Genene had verbally abused and physically assaulted a cardiac care patient, causing them significant stress and health complications. The hospital, aiming to avoid a lawsuit, convinced her to resign. Despite this red flag, Genene secured another nursing position at Community Hospital. However, this stint also ended abruptly after 5 months. This time, it wasn't a patient complaint, but her own scheduled surgery, a tubal ligation. Unwilling to reschedule, she simply resigned. When Genene applied for a critical role in the intensive care unit at Behar County Hospital, a crucial step was missed. The hospital contacted her previous employer, Methodist Hospital, for a reference. Instead of responding with Genene's concerning history, Methodist Hospital simply returned the form blank. With no red flags raised, Behar County Hospital, unaware of her past patient abuse, placed Genene in the pediatric unit, entrusting her with the care of vulnerable children. This lapse in communication between hospitals had devastating consequences. It allowed Genene, a potential danger, to gain access to some of the most helpless patients. Genene started working at the county hospital on October 30th, 1978. Her first patient was a premature baby with necrotizing enterocolitis, a frequently fatal condition.
The former nurse is already behind bars for the death of one child 32 years ago.
After surgery, the baby returned to the ICU and soon died. According to Genene's supervising RN at the time, she became hysterical upon learning of the baby's death, sitting next to the body and staring at it. She appeared unusually energized during codes, and following a patient's death, would display a heightened emotional response that some found unsettling. Despite this emotional start, Genene soon impressed her supervisors by picking up extra shifts and skillfully placing IVs in the tiny patients. Although she rubbed some staff the wrong way, patients' families loved her because she took the time to listen to their concerns. However, Genene's desire for attention led to tall tales, claiming she survived a car accident and a coma, and even that she shot her brother-in-law for abusing her sister. Genene's behavior in the pediatric ICU became increasingly erratic. She bypassed her role as a nurse, frequently summoning doctors with false alarms and insisting on unnecessary treatments. Her pronouncements about patient conditions, delivered with an air of false authority, strained her relationship with colleagues. The arrival of Dr. James Robotham, a seasoned professional, initially brought a change. He implemented protocols for monitoring patients and praised Genene's performance, perhaps unaware of her underlying issues. This positive reinforcement fueled Genene's ego, leading her to boast about correcting doctors' diagnoses and saving lives, claims likely fueled by her own fabrications. Adding to the red flags, Genene developed a pattern of self-inflicted drama. Over a 2-year period, she visited the hospital complaining of various ailments a staggering 30 times. These visits, often ending with no diagnosis, suggested a deeper psychological problem. Experts believe she might have suffered from Munchausen syndrome, now called factitious disorder, a condition where individuals feign illness for attention. Alternatively, she could have had illness anxiety disorder, previously known as hypochondria. leading her to genuinely believe she was constantly sick. Genene Jones's lack of proper judgment regarding illness in children was catastrophic. On May 14, 1981, she prematurely called the parents of 1-year-old Chris Oida to inform them he had died, only for them to find him alive upon arrival. Despite a reprimand, she continued caring for Chris, who died a week later under her care. This incident marked the beginning of an alarming period in the pediatric ICU, where stable children suddenly began experiencing severe complications and deaths. One of the earliest events was on October 19th, when 3-month-old Albert Garza, under Genene's care, developed a sudden and severe case of bleeding. This wasn't normal for a young infant. Dr. Robotham, now alerted to the possibility of heparin overdoses, suspected foul play, so he implemented stricter protocols, requiring 2 nurses to be present for heparin administration. However, the horror continued. Investigations revealed that all 8 children needing resuscitation that month were under Genene's watch, while she herself had numerous unexplained hospitalizations. None of the ICU's deaths occurred during those times. So Dr. Robotham began piecing together the puzzle and linked 9 unexpected deaths to Genene, all with signs of potential drug overdoses. Despite these red flags, hospital administrators remained unconvinced, attributing Genene's actions to just silly mistakes. Dr. Robotham, however, still wouldn't be deterred because his tests confirmed there was no contamination in the medication or equipment. The only variable was Genene.
This nurse, who could be responsible for the deaths of dozens of children, has been indicted for killing another infant.
I will tell you there's new evidence presented to us that they discovered, and then we also reevaluated old evidence that had been looked at before but not looked at the way we did, and then our strategy is a little bit different. So, like I said, we're working in good faith, and we absolutely believe that she is guilty and that she'll be held accountable.
On December 8th, tragedy struck again. An 11-month-old coma patient, Joshua Sawyer, died under Genene's care. Tests later revealed a fatal level of Dilantin medication in his blood, which was a clear sign of foul play. But unfortunately, these results were tragically overlooked. The ICU treated desperately ill children, and there was really no ironclad proof she was responsible. Meanwhile, a hospital assistant, Patricia Lopez, noticed a disturbing trend of missing supplies, which included heparin, from crash carts during Genene's shifts. But her concerns, however, fell on deaf ears.
Kid, he's only like 2 years old, he's got glucose over 500, and he has no signs of being diabetic at all. I don't know what's going on. And he had been up in the ICU, discharged and brought back almost immediately because of his actions. So with the skills that I was able to acquire over the years, I was able to track this down. I was able to quantify the heparin that was involved in it. And that, like I said, that was the center of the case where they said something needs to be done.
The new year brought no respite. On December 27th of that same year, Dr. Kenneth Copeland, a pediatric endocrinologist, treated 1-month-old Rolando Santos for pneumonia. The baby initially improved, but on January 1st, his condition became worse. Unexplained seizures and a plummeting blood pressure left everyone scrambling. This would be another pivotal moment in the chilling story of Genene Jones. Doctors stabilized Rolando, and he continued to improve. But on January 3rd, he started bleeding heavily and went into cardiac arrest, but was stabilized again. On January 9th, he began bleeding once more. Copeland, suspecting a heparin overdose, injected Rolando with protamine sulfate, a heparin antidote. Despite the risk if he was wrong, the bleeding stopped, and this confirmed a deliberate overdose. Rolando was moved out of the ICU and guarded around the clock. 5 days later, he recovered and was discharged.
A normal range for heparin therapeutic value, and this was a 1-month-old child, mind you, is normal range for anybody is 0.3 to 0.7 units per ml of heparin. This kid had, if I remember correctly, it was something like 14.1. which would have been enough to anticoagulate a 250-pound man for over 24 hours.
2 British mathematicians and experts on statistical evidence started studying staff rosters at Behar County Hospital and later made a startling discovery. The hospital kept records of various metrics, including death rates, which seemed to spike significantly during Genene Jones's shifts. Their analysis revealed that it was 10.7 times more likely for a patient to die during her shift than any other. Why was this happening? Genene typically worked from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. During a typical shift in October 1981, children in stable condition would suddenly suffer seizures and cardiac arrest. Within months, at least 6 or 7 infants were close to death, and 1 did die. Bottles of succinylcholine, a muscle relaxant used before general anesthesia that caused short-term paralysis and were very hard to detect, were found with puncture marks. When questioned about it, Genene offered excuses and suggested disposing of the bottle so that she could effectively get rid of the evidence. Despite the mounting evidence, Dr. Copeland's concerns fell on deaf ears. Genene's convenient excuse of a medication mix-up, soundly debunked by Dr. Copeland, held no weight with the hospital administrators. They remained unmoved and left the children vulnerable. The horror reached a new peak on January 14th. 4-month-old Patrick Zavala, recovering well from heart surgery, entered Genene's care. By the 17th, tragically, Patrick had coded multiple times and died. This blatant disregard for life, following a string of unexplained deaths, finally forced the hand of the frustrated surgeons. They pressured the administration to take action. However, the response was a bureaucratic farce. Instead of confronting the potential killer in their midst, the hospital consulted a lawyer, and their solution was firing. Genene could lead to a lawsuit, so they opted for a quiet cover-up. The hospital's decision to not address the issue or prevent Genene from continuing her nursing career showed a hear no evil, see no evil attitude. By putting the problem elsewhere, they absolved themselves of responsibility. Consequently, Genene was free to pursue another nursing job, which she did.
Well, she is known as the Angel of Death, already in prison for killing a baby in the 1980s.
Driven by her desire to maintain the status and perceived care associated with the profession, they replaced all licensed vocational nurses with registered nurses, effectively removing Genene from the equation without addressing the deaths. Tellingly, the pediatric ICU's death rate dropped sharply after her departure. Genene, the Angel of Death in disguise, wasted no time. She quickly secured a new job at a pediatrician's office in Kerrville, Texas, a small town known for its summer camps. The lack of any formal warning or record of her past actions at Behar County Hospital meant she could start afresh, continuing her dangerous patterns in a new setting. The doctor in charge, Dr. Kathy Holland, who was a former third-year pediatric resident, despite whispers of suspicion surrounding Genene, chose to trust her and welcomed her onto the team. Little did she know, Genene would soon use her access to manipulate the situation, ensuring the office was stocked with succinylcholine, which is rarely used in pediatric settings. This hinted at the darkness Genene was about to unleash in her new role. Initially, the clinic saw a steady stream of patients, but soon, several children began crashing and needed to be transferred to the hospital. In the first month after opening, 7 of Dr. Holland's patients had to be rushed to the hospital a total of 8 times.
A woman known as the killer nurse, and a woman now serving a life sentence in prison.
Of these cases, the most famous was that of Chelsea McClellan. Her mother, Petty, took her to the doctor for a bad cold. However, Dr. Holland's receptionist claimed Chelsea's breathing was so bad she was turning blue, which Petty later denied. While she and Dr. Holland reviewed her daughter's medical history, Genene offered to take Chelsea to play. Moments later, Genene called for help as the baby was unresponsive and seizing. She was rushed to the hospital where she recovered, and Petty praised Dr. Holland for saving her daughter, but her daughter would only survive for a while. On August 27th, 1-month-old Brandy Benitez was brought in with diarrhea and bloody stool. After Genene took her to the exam room, Brandy stopped breathing. She was rushed to the hospital and recovered after 6 days, though doctors couldn't explain what happened. On August 30th, Marianne Parker brought her 4-month-old son, Christopher, in for breathing issues, and he was transferred to the hospital. During the same period, 7-year-old Jimmy Pearson, who had a hereditary condition causing seizures, was also admitted. Both children were transferred to Santa Rosa Hospital in San Antonio. During the helicopter flight, Genene claimed Jimmy was having seizures, although paramedics saw nothing wrong. She injected him with a syringe, causing his heart to beat irregularly. He was stabilized at the hospital after receiving CPR. At Santa Rosa Hospital, a nurse familiar with Genene noticed the high number of Dr. Holland's patients being transferred there. She confronted Dr. Holland, who defended Genene, unaware of her suspicious actions. In September, Chelsea returned to the clinic for a checkup and vaccines. After Genene administered a shot, Chelsea had trouble breathing and seized. She was rushed to the hospital and stabilized, but died en route to a larger hospital. The next day, 5-month-old Jacob was brought in for excessive crying. He stopped breathing after being left alone with Genene and had to be rushed to the hospital where he was stabilized. Genene claimed Jacob had a bulging fontanelle and later said she never examined him, though this contradicted her notes and the parents' recollections.
They want to make sure notorious former nurse Genene Jones never gets out of prison.
Subsequently, more of Dr. Holland's patients needed emergency care. The hospital staff grew suspicious, realizing no pediatrician had so many patients requiring hospital admissions. The number of emergencies at Dr. Holland's pediatric clinic was unprecedented, making it clear that the medical issues affecting these children were not natural. Someone was poisoning babies. One such case was 4-month-old Paul Villarreal, who died unexpectedly after an elective procedure due to uncontrollable bleeding at the county hospital. The pediatric ICU's death rate doubled, a strong indicator of unnatural causes. Typically, the ICU resuscitated 3 to 4 patients a month, but in August 1981, they had 9 cases, and in September, 13. Most incidents occurred during the evening shift, primarily under Genene's care. The ward was a terribly perilous place when Genene Jones was on duty. The number of infant deaths that occurred during what later became known as the death shift was staggering. It was found that 10 times as many deaths happened on the wards patrolled by Genene Jones compared to when she was not on duty. Despite these alarming statistics, the full extent of her actions remains untested in court. The truth behind what happened in 2 Texas medical units in 1982 is a secret that Genene Jones alone knows.
She said that she did not want Genene to get parole, and that Genene told her, I didn't kill the babies, the voices in my head did.
The night shift had become notoriously traumatic. While some children died on Nurse Jones's watch, others were seemingly saved by her quick, exemplary thinking. Her reputation was paradoxical. Some saw her as a hero, while others viewed her with suspicion. A lot of parents and healthcare team members rely on nurses for comfort, reassurance, and general care. Nurses are integral to patient care, responsible for administering medications, ensuring patients' well-being, and providing emotional support. However, nursing did not come naturally to Genene. She was drawn to the profession because of the caring reputation of nurses, but she lacked the essential traits of empathy and sympathy. Instead, her psychopathic traits and inability to empathize with people made her a dangerous presence in a caregiving role. Despite suspicions and alarming statistics during her time in Behar County Hospital, it took considerable time and effort to uncover the full extent of her actions. The investigation into her behavior revealed a chilling pattern of abuse and a deeply unsettling exploitation of her position as a nurse. The infants under Genene Jones's care who were near death often revived, leading her to display a gloating attitude. Her frequent presence during these crises went unnoticed initially, as the hospital staff did not suspect foul play. Vulnerable patients, particularly children, were prone to sudden health declines, and this was often seen as natural. However, as death rates were monitored, it became clear that the incidence of infant deaths was significantly higher during Genene's shifts. This aroused suspicion. Finding firm evidence of wrongdoing was challenging. If someone was poisoning the patients with drugs, testing blood samples might not reveal anything conclusive. The detection of drugs in the body depends on their half-life, which dictates how long they remain detectable. Some drugs may disappear from the body in minutes, while others can linger for days. Some nurses at the hospital, too, noticed strange things happening and started to suspect Genene, but her boss, Pat Belko, didn't listen. Maybe it was because Pat herself had once accidentally given a patient too much medicine. One nurse, Susanna Maldonado, wasn't going to let it go. She collected evidence that showed Genene might be behind the patient deaths. It was after Belko had seen the evidence that she finally took it to Dr. Robotham. Even with all this evidence, the hospital leaders had just wanted to avoid bad publicity and pretend nothing was wrong. They had shut down any attempts to investigate. Despite her removal, the full extent of Genene Jones's actions and the number of her victims remained uncertain, leaving a dark legacy in the Texas medical community. It wasn't until the investigation began that the full extent of the tragedy started to come to light. Succinylcholine, typically used by anesthetists due to its its paralyzing effects, was not easily accessible to nurses. It was locked away securely, but a missing bottle led to a crucial breakthrough in the investigation into Genene Jones. The exhumation of Chelsea McClellan's body and subsequent tissue analysis in a Swedish clinic revealed the presence of succinylcholine, confirming it as the cause of her death. This evidence led to Genene Jones being charged with Chelsea's murder. However, Chelsea was likely not her only victim. The investigation uncovered the possibility of many other children being harmed. Rosemary Vega, 2 months old, Richard Nelson, 8 months, and many others.
Suspected of killing dozens of babies in the 80s is facing new charges tonight. Genene Jones has been charged with the 1981 murder of 2-year-old Rosemary Vega.
During this period, Genene tried to commit suicide, which didn't happen due to an insufficient dose of drugs, but that appeared more as a cry for attention than a genuine effort. Her notes claim she was innocent, and then she started reading the Bible in prison. Investigators checked the backgrounds of both Dr. Kathy Holland and Genene Jones. Contacting the hospital where Dr. Holland did her residency, they learned of a series of unexplained child deaths at Behar County Hospital, all linked to a nurse whose name he confirmed as Genene Jones. This information prompted law enforcement involvement. When questioned, Dr. Holland denied using succinylcholine, despite keeping it in her clinic, and also accessible only by her and Genene. It was after discovering 2 needle marks on the rubber top of the vial that she finally realized that Genene was harming patients. Consulting with other doctors, including an anesthesiologist, they deduced that low doses of succinylcholine could mimic seizures in children, and it perfectly fit the symptoms they observed.
Holland related a series of unexplained occurrences. First, there was a bottle of succinylcholine missing. Then it turned up, seemingly full of the drug, but with 2 needle holes on top. Then there was a third purchase of succinylcholine by G. Jones, which had not been approved by Holland.
Texas Ranger Joe Davis later interviewed Genene, who denied injecting life-threatening drugs, but volunteered for a polygraph test, of course, which she failed. District Attorney Ron Sutton then took over the case, uncovering that 8 of Dr. Holland's patients had been poisoned, with incidents occurring in various medical settings. The investigation also revealed that Behar County Hospital had covered up 11 more suspicious child deaths. In some instances, the babies she cared for, who were near the brink of death, would eventually be revived, and as a result of her actions, didn't die.
Now, she's suspected in a number of child deaths. Now, she previously underwent a competency and sanity evaluations, and a doctor did find her competent to stand trial.
She would go around almost in a gloating fashion, proclaiming, "Look what I did. I saved this person. I saved this child. I did it. I did it. I did it." Chelsea's parents initially placed an advertisement in a local newspaper. Among the things they wrote was a special thanks to Dr. Catherine Holland and Genene Jones for extending their daughter's stay longer with their caring in such a sensitive way. In her notes about that day, Genene Jones had also left a message stating, "I would have given my life for her. Goodbye, Chelsea." The nurse appeared to be in grief. Genene even turned up at the cemetery where Chelsea was buried, which Chelsea's mother found somewhat disorienting. A few weeks after Chelsea was buried, Petty, Chelsea's mother, went to her grave to put some flowers there. She was shocked to suddenly see the nurse, Genene Jones, over her daughter's grave, wailing, sobbing, and slashing. When she confronted the nurse, asking what she was doing there and why she was there, Genene gave her a cold, darting glare, didn't say a word, got up in a huff, and stormed off. Petty couldn't believe it, and then uncovered something else that unnerved her. She started noticing things missing from her daughter's grave that people had placed there, such as flowers and little mementos. She began to wonder if Genene had taken these things, thinking she'd keep them as trophies and possessions. When she was spotted at Chelsea's grave, some might think it was about remorse or sorrow, but with Janene's personality, that was very unlikely to be the case. The DA leaked these details to the media, forcing the hospital to cooperate fully. Despite having substantial circumstantial evidence, the DA needed solid proof. Exhuming Chelsea McClellan's body and finding succinylcholine in her tissue provided that proof, leading to Genene's indictment for murder and intentional harm to 7 other children. Arrested the same day, Genene Genene maintained her innocence. However, the succinylcholine evidence, a witness seeing her inject a clear liquid, and the statistical improbability of such incidents only happening during her shifts convinced the jury of her guilt. The sudden drop in incidents after her departure from the hospital and the resurgence at Dr. Holland's clinic underscored her culpability. On February 11, 1985, Genene Jones was found guilty of the murder of Chelsea McClellan and was sentenced and convicted by a juror and got 99 years for murder. And she also got 60 years for injury to a child. But for all intents and purposes, all the sentences run concurrently, so 99 years, which under parole laws means 60 years. Here's the rub. Any violent offender convicted in the state of Texas between 1977 and 1987 is subject to automatic mandatory release as long as they maintain good behavior in prison. One of the nation's, probably one of the world's most cold-blooded, diabolical serial killers that, quite frankly, most of the public has no clue even exists. In 2011, Genene sent a letter to the Texas Board of Nursing apologizing for all the damage she had done because of her crimes. She claimed that she wasn't of sound mind any time before 1994. She wrote, "I look back now on what I did and agree with you that it was heinous, that I was heinous." In 2016, Genene was scheduled for mandatory release due to a new Texas law that was put in place to prevent prison overcrowding. Victims of Genene banded together to do something to keep the baby murderer in prison. Some of the people who were advocating for her to stay in prison were the babies she had tried to kill. A social media page was even set up to track down parents of children who died or suffered, whilst Genene Jones was on duty, just to build up more cases to keep her forever locked up. But as things stood, a countdown to the reappearance on Texan streets of Nurse Genene Jones looked inevitable. Justice had been sorely lacking in this case, and it demands that the right thing be done to provide justice for those helpless infants who couldn't scream and yell for help. Rolando Santos went on the news and expressed his concern over Genene's possible release. The district attorney in San Antonio dusted off all of the old files from the children that had died under Genene's care, and it was the case of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer that had the best chance of keeping the nurse in prison. That was the case where the doctor had ordered a blood test in an effort to find a proper treatment for the baby. But once Joshua died, the test result just got filed away. The results wouldn't help the doctor keep Josh alive, but they would help prove that he was poisoned. Jones once spoke of the deaths to a fellow inmate, who then reportedly wrote to the parole board to oppose her release after Jones allegedly confessed to additional killings. According to the station's report, Jones claimed she didn't act alone, but was influenced by voices in her head. While admitting to the 2 murders for which she was convicted, authorities believed she may be responsible for more deaths. That's when her parole officer, Marcy Ferguson, reported that Jones initially confessed to the 2 known killings, but then made a cryptic statement suggesting involvement in other uncharged crimes. When the parole officer reached for her files on Jones's 2 convictions, Jones said she wouldn't find those type of files there. Genene was charged with the murder of Joshua Sawyer, and in 2020, she pleaded guilty in exchange for the DA dropping 4 other charges. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. She will be 87 years old by then, but Genene Jones played God, finding euphoria in the power of controlling life and death, leading to the deaths of at least 24 infants, possibly more. She harmed and killed the most vulnerable, babies, driven by a desire for power and control. She is the very definition of a monster who wanted to be respected, feared, and adored, all at the same time. This only makes it difficult to trust that nurses have our best interest at heart, because, think about it, would Genene Jones once again try to escape justice? Or is she still gaining some kind of benefit from the ongoing game? You'll never find out without subscribing right away.